My name is Elena Carter, and I'm 36 years old. Just last week, I attended a prestigious gala, an event meant to celebrate my achievements in scientific research and education. It was supposed to be a night of recognition, a validation of years of struggle and hard work. But instead, it turned into a reminder of the past I thought I had left behind. I had just stepped into the restroom to gather my thoughts, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment, when I saw my mother. She was standing at the mirror, reapplying her lipstick with the same practiced elegance she had always carried. Dressed in an expensive gown, hairstyled to perfection, she looked every bit the high society woman she had always been. For a fleeting moment, I considered slipping away before she noticed me. But then her eyes lifted, locking onto mine through the mirror. Her hand froze mid-motion. Her jaw tightened. "Elena," she said, her voice smooth but distant, like she was greeting an old acquaintance instead of her own daughter. "I didn't expect to see you here." I gripped my clutch a little tighter, steadying myself. I could say the same. My tone was even, but my heart was hammering in my chest. "What brings you here?" She turned to face me, her posture rigid. "Your father and I were invited, of course. We've always been involved in causes that support education, of course." The irony almost made me laugh. The same people who once told me I was a disgrace were now supporting the very field that had given me a second chance at life. "I'm being honored tonight," I said, holding her gaze, "for my research." For the briefest moment, something flickered in her eyes. Shock? Pride? I couldn't tell. But then, just as quickly, she masked it, offering a curt nod. "I see," she said simply. Then, turning back to the mirror, she added, "Well, I suppose everyone finds their way eventually." Her words sent me straight back to the day I walked out of their house for the last time. I was 18. A teenager drowning in expectations too heavy for me to carry. Growing up, I had struggled with depression, though I never dared say it out loud. In our house, emotions were weaknesses, and vulnerability was unacceptable. I still remember the day I tried to tell my mother how I felt, how I woke up every morning feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of their expectations. Her response? A sigh of irritation. "What do you have to be sad about, Elena?" she had said, exasperated. "You have everything. You're just being dramatic." I wasn't being dramatic. I was drowning. I tried my best to keep up, to be the perfect daughter they wanted. But my grades slipped, my energy drained, and by my senior year, I was barely holding on. When I only got accepted into a community college instead of an Ivy League school, my father's disappointment turned to rage. "This family has standards," he had said that night, pacing the living room while I stood there, clutching my acceptance letter like it was a death sentence. "And you have done nothing but drag us down." And then, just like that, I was gone. I still remember the weight of my duffel bag as I walked out the door. It wasn't just my belongings I carried. It was the realization that I was truly on my own. My mother didn't even look up from her phone as I left. My father had already disappeared into his study, done with me before I was even out the door. I crashed at a friend's place for a few weeks, sleeping on a lumpy couch and trying to figure out what the hell to do next. Community college wasn't glamorous, but it was the only thing I had left. So I worked. Hard. Balancing classes with a part-time job at a diner, scraping together just enough to afford a tiny studio apartment. Those years were brutal, but for the first time I was free. I threw myself into chemistry, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. It was the first thing in my life that made sense. It was logic, structure, something I could understand when everything else felt chaotic. I still remember my first big exam, the way my hands trembled as I turned the paper over. I had studied harder than I ever had in my life, and when I got my results back, a 92%, I nearly cried right there in class. That was the first time I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the failure they had always told me I was. It wasn't easy. The journey was long, filled with endless nights of studying, working, and barely keeping my head above water. But I made it. And now, here I was, standing in front of my mother after all these years, an award-winning researcher being honored for achievements they never believed I was capable of. And she couldn't even bring herself to acknowledge it. She capped her lipstick, adjusted a stray hair, and offered me the smallest, most indifferent smile. "It was nice seeing you, Elena," she said, like we had just bumped into each other at a grocery store. And then she turned and walked out. I stood there for a moment, staring at my own reflection. Maybe some part of me had hoped that this night, this moment, would change something, that she would see me and realize what she had lost. But she never would. Taking a deep breath, I straightened my dress, adjusted my posture, and walked out of that restroom with my head held high. I had built a life without them, and no matter what they thought, that was enough. I walked out of the restroom feeling like I had just stepped through a time machine, one that had dragged me back to a place I never wanted to return to. The sounds of the gala, the clinking glasses, the soft murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of polite laughter felt distant, like I was hearing them from underwater. My mother had slipped back into the crowd with practiced ease, blending in with the other guests like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just seen her daughter for the first time in nearly 2 decades. I exhaled slowly, pressing my fingertips against my temples. Focus, Elena. This was my night. Not hers, not theirs. A voice broke through my thoughts. There you are. I was wondering where you disappeared to. I turned to see Mia, my best friend and co-researcher, making her way toward me, a glass of champagne in hand. Her dark curls were pinned up, and she had that effortless confidence I always admired. Just needed a second, I said, forcing a smile. Mia narrowed her eyes. Elena, she warned, tilting her head. What happened? Mia had been with me through everything, the all-nighters in undergrad, the self-doubt, the celebrations. She knew me too well to fall for the act. My mother's here, I admitted, keeping my voice even. Her eyebrows shot up. Wait, here? As in this room. She glanced around like she was about to spot a ghost. Did she? I nodded. We ran into each other in the restroom. Mia's expression darkened. And nothing. I let out a dry laugh. She acted like I was a distant relative she hadn't seen in years. Polite. Detached. I shrugged. It was exactly what I should have expected. Mia's grip on her champagne glass tightened. You're telling me this woman, who basically cut you off, shows up at your gala, sees you being honored, and just what? Pretends it's a coincidence? Sounds about right. Mia exhaled sharply. You want me to accidentally spill my drink on her? That made me laugh. And for the first time since that bathroom encounter, I felt some of the tension ease. Tempting, I admitted. But no, she's not worth it. Mia studied me for a moment before sighing. Fine. But if you change your mind, say the word. I shook my head, but before I could respond, the lights dimmed slightly. A voice came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The awards ceremony will begin shortly. Mia gave me a reassuring nod. You ready? I took a breath. Yeah, let's do this. The ceremony started with a series of speeches, most of which blurred together in a mix of scientific jargon and formalities. I was half listening, my mind still replaying the moment in the restroom, when I heard my name. And now we are honored to present this year's Achievement in Science and Education Award to Dr. Elena Carter for her groundbreaking contributions to environmental chemistry and education. Applause erupted around the room. I stood, smoothing my dress, and made my way toward the stage. As I climbed the steps, I forced myself to focus not on the past, not on who might be watching, but on the moment. My moment. I took the microphone, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on me. Thank you, I began, my voice steady, despite the whirlwind of emotions beneath the surface. If you had told me years ago that I'd be standing here tonight, I wouldn't have believed you. Not because I didn't dream of it, but because I didn't think it was possible. A pause, a deep breath. My journey here wasn't traditional. It wasn't paved with ease or expectation, but it was mine. And it taught me something valuable. Success isn't about where you start, it's about where you refuse to stop. A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I dedicate this to every student who's ever been told they weren't good enough. To every person who had to carve their own path when no one believed they could. You can. The applause swelled as I stepped back, my heart hammering. I scanned the crowd, my gaze instinctively searching for her. But my mother wasn't looking at me. She was turned slightly, her expression unreadable. Then I saw someone else. My father. I hadn't noticed him before, but there he was, sitting stiffly at a table near the back. His jaw was clenched, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. I could see at the moment realization hit him, that the award, the applause, the success, it was mine. For years he had told me I wouldn't amount to anything, That I was a disappointment. And yet, here I was. Our eyes met, his nostrils flared, and then, just like that, he stood up, walked out. I barely had time to process it before the host's voice rang out again. And now, in recognition of her remarkable work, we are thrilled to announce that an anonymous donor has pledged a $2 million grant in support of Dr. Carter's research and educational initiatives. The room went silent for half a second before applause erupted again. I felt frozen. $2 million? I turned my head slightly, watching as my father reached the exit. He paused, just for a moment, before pushing the door open and disappearing into the night. Mia was at my side the moment I stepped off the stage. "Elena, that was incredible." She gripped my arm. "But did you see your dad?" I nodded, still trying to make sense of it all. Before I could respond, the host's voice filled the room again. "We would also like to acknowledge the organization behind this generous contribution, Mosaic Fertilizers, a leader in agricultural innovation." The breath left my lungs. Mosaic Fertilizers. My father's company. The same man who disowned me. The man who walked out the moment he heard my name. He had funded the award. Mia's hand tightened around mine. "Elena." I swallowed hard. My mind raced, trying to process the cruel irony of it all. My success had been built without them. And yet, without knowing it, he had helped fund it. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. But one thing was certain: this wasn't over. I barely heard the applause anymore. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My father's company had funded the award. The same man who had called me a disgrace. The man who threw me out like I was nothing. He had unknowingly bankrolled the moment that proved him wrong. Mia was still gripping my arm, her voice low but urgent. "Elena, are you okay?" I nodded automatically, though my mind was a mess. I don't know. I needed air. Slipping away from the crowd, I made my way toward the back of the venue, pushing open a door that led to the balcony. The cool night air hit my skin, a sharp contrast to the heat rising in my chest. I leaned against the railing, my hands trembling. This was supposed to be my night, a moment of triumph. But instead, it felt like the past had reached out and wrapped its hands around my throat. The door behind me creaked open. I stiffened. "Elena," I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I knew that voice. My father. A bitter laugh bubbled up inside me. Of course he followed me out here. Of course he had something to say now after all these years. Slowly I turned to face him. He stood a few feet away, hands shoved in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "You walked out," I said flatly, before they even finished announcing the award. His jaw tightened. "I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" "That the recipient was you." His voice was clipped, controlled. "If I had, you would have what?" I cut in, my pulse hammering, pulled the donation, stopped the award. His silence told me everything I needed to know. I let out a sharp breath. "Right, of course." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "It wasn't personal." I scoffed. "Oh, wasn't it?" His eyes met mine, cold and unyielding. "I don't see why you're upset. You got what you wanted." I stared at him, my chest tight. "What I wanted?" I shook my head. "Do you really think any of this was about you?" His expression darkened. "Spare me the dramatics, Elena." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You have no idea what it took to get here. No idea how hard I had to fight just to survive after you threw me out." His eyes flickered, but he didn't respond. "I worked my ass off," I continued, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I spent years proving to myself, not to you, that I was worth something. And now, after all this time, after everything you did, your money, the same money you used to hold over my head, ends up funding my biggest achievement." I let out a breath. "That's the irony, Dad. You still lost." For a brief second, I thought I saw something: guilt, regret, but it was gone as fast as it appeared. His voice was colder now. "You think you're better than us?" I met his stare without flinching. "No, I think I'm free." He exhaled sharply. And yet, here we are, still having this conversation. I studied him, really studied him. The lines around his eyes were deeper. His hair had more gray than I remembered. But the thing that struck me most, he wasn't as tall as I remembered, as imposing. Maybe he never had been. "I don't need anything from you," I said quietly. "Not your approval, not your money, not even this conversation." His lips pressed into a thin line. He looked like he wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't. He just shook his head and turned to leave. I didn't stop him. As the door clicked shut behind him, I let out a slow, steady breath. That was it. The moment I had spent years imagining the face-off, the confrontation, the chance to finally say everything I had bottled up. And now that it had happened, I just felt tired. I stayed on the balcony for a while, letting the city lights blur in the distance. The night air was sharp, crisp. Mia found me eventually. She didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the railing beside me. "So," she finally said, "that looked intense." I sighed. "It was." She studied my face. "Are you okay?" I thought about it. About all the years I had spent waiting for that moment. About how, in the end, it wasn't nearly as satisfying as I had imagined. "I think so," I admitted. Mia nudged me gently. "Well, if it helps, you're still a badass." That made me smile, just a little. After a long pause, I said, "I don't want the money." Mia blinked. "What?" "The grant. The $2 million. It came from him. I can't keep it." Her forehead creased. "Elena, that money could do a lot of good. You could do a lot of good." "I know," I said, and I meant it, but it wouldn't feel right. I had spent too many years fighting to prove I wasn't dependent on him. Keeping that money, even if I used it for good, would still feel like accepting something from him. And I didn't need anything from him. Not anymore. Mia sighed, running a hand through her curls. "Okay, so what's the plan?" I exhaled. "I donated. All of it. Scholarships, funding for underprivileged students, kids like me. Kids who had to fight just to get a shot." Mia was quiet for a second. Then she smiled. "You know what? I love it. That money came from him, but now it's going to help people he would have never lifted a finger for." I nodded. "Exactly." And just like that, the weight that had been sitting on my chest since the announcement felt a little lighter. The next morning, I finalized the donation. Every last cent. When the confirmation email came through, I stared at it for a long time. Transaction complete. It was done. That money, the money my father had unknowingly given, was no longer tied to him. It wasn't about him. It was about something bigger. And for the first time in years, I felt free. A week had passed since the gala, since the confrontation, since I had let go of the money, and with it, any remaining ties to my father. And yet, I still felt the weight of it all. I had expected closure, some kind of finality. But instead, there was just emptiness. Not regret. I knew I had made the right choice. But after so many years spent fighting for my place, proving myself, I wasn't sure what to do now that there was nothing left to prove. I poured myself into work, late nights in the lab, research proposals, teaching, anything to keep my mind from circling back to him, to them. But no matter how hard I tried, the past had a way of creeping in. It started with a phone call. I was in my office, sorting through emails, when my assistant knocked on the door. "There's a call for you," she said. "Someone named Lydia?" I froze. Aunt Lydia, my mother's younger sister, the only family member who had ever truly been there for me. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not because I didn't want to, but because I had convinced myself that if I let go of my parents, I had to let go of everything tied to them. I took a steady breath and picked up the phone. "Lydia, Elena." Her voice was warm, familiar, but there was an edge to it, a hesitation. "What's wrong?" I asked. A pause. Then, "It's your father." I felt my stomach tighten. "What about him?" There was another pause, longer this time. Then, in a voice quieter than before, she said, "He had a stroke." I didn't respond right away. My mind struggled to process the words. My father, the man who had spent years towering over me, both literally and figuratively. The man who had always seemed invincible, untouchable. And now, what? "What do you mean?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It happened 2 days ago," Lydia said. "He collapsed at home. The doctors say it was serious, but he survived. He's in recovery, but..." She hesitated. "It's changed him, Elena." I swallowed hard. "How?" "He's weak. He can barely move his right side. His speech is affected. And," she sighed, "he's been asking about you." I gripped the edge of my desk. "He's asking about me?" "Yes." I let out a shaky breath. "I don't understand." He made it perfectly clear where he stood. He walked out of that gala without a second thought. "I know," Lydia's voice was gentle, "and I'm not saying you owe him anything. But," she paused, "I just thought you should know." I closed my eyes. Did I want to know? Did I care? I wasn't sure. "Elena?" I exhaled slowly. Where is he? The hospital smelled like antiseptic. And something else, something stale. Like time standing still. I almost didn't go. I had sat in my car in the parking lot for a full 15 minutes, staring at the entrance, trying to talk myself out of it. But in the end, curiosity won. Or maybe it was something else. The moment I stepped into his room, I barely recognized him. He looked small. Not physically, he was still the same man who had once towered over me. But there was something different, a frailty in the way he sat, propped up by pillows, a hollowness in his eyes. He turned his head when he saw me, his movements slow and deliberate. "Elena," he said, or at least he tried to. His voice was slurred, the word barely forming. I hesitated in the doorway, my hands tightening into fists. "Lydia said you were asking for me." My voice was steady, but my heart was anything but. His gaze held mine. He swallowed hard before speaking again, the effort visible in every muscle of his face. I was wrong. 3 words. Simple, but staggering. I didn't move. About what? His mouth twitched, as if forming the words was painful. You. I let out a breath when I hadn't realized I was holding. Why now? I asked, my voice quieter than before. Why, after all these years? His expression twisted, frustration flickering in his eyes. Whether at himself or at me, I wasn't sure. He lifted his left hand, his good hand gesturing weakly. "Lost," he said. "Everything." I didn't know if he meant his health, his power, his pride, maybe all of it. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You didn't lose me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You threw me away." His face contorted slightly, anger, shame, regret. I didn't know. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I took a step back. "I don't know why I came here," I admitted. His hand twitched. "Stay." I shook my head. "I don't think I can." For the first time in my life, my father looked afraid, not of me, not of what I had become, but of being alone. And for some reason, that hurt more than anything else. I turned and walked away before I could change my mind. Lydia found me outside, sitting on a bench, staring at nothing. "How did it go?" she asked gently. I let out a breath. "I don't know." She nodded, like she understood. "And maybe she did. You don't have to forgive him," she said after a moment. "You don't owe him anything." I looked up at her. "Then why do I feel like I do?" Lydia sighed. "Because you're not like him." I stared down at my hands. "No," I admitted, "I'm not." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about his face, the way he looked at me, the fear, the regret. And I kept asking myself, what now? I had spent my entire life defining myself by what I wasn't. I wasn't a failure. I wasn't dependent on them. I wasn't who they said I was. But if I wasn't those things, then who was I? For the first time in years, I didn't have an answer. I didn't go back to the hospital. Not the next day. Not the day after that. For a while, I told myself it didn't matter. That my father's sudden change of heart, if that's what it even was, didn't undo years of damage. That whatever guilt he felt now wasn't my responsibility. But the truth was, he had gotten under my skin. I hated that. I threw myself into work again, hoping it would drown out the noise in my head. But it didn't. Mia noticed. She always did. "You're spiraling," she said one evening, leaning against my office door with her arms crossed. "I'm fine." She rolled her eyes. "You're overworking yourself. You're not sleeping. And I caught you staring at the same email for 5 minutes. That's not fine." I sighed, rubbing my temples. I hesitated, struggling to put it into words. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Mia sat down across from me, studying my face. "You don't have to do anything." "That's the problem," I muttered. "For so long I've been fighting, proving myself, moving forward. Now, for the first time, there's no battle to fight, no next step. And I don't know how to exist without that." Mia nodded slowly. "And your dad?" I exhaled sharply. "I don't know." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You don't owe him forgiveness, but maybe you owe yourself a decision." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're stuck in limbo. You walked away from him, but you didn't really let it go. You're still carrying it." She tilted her head. "Maybe it's time to figure out what you actually want." I swallowed. "I don't even know where to start." Mia leaned back, smirking slightly. "Lucky for you, I do." The next morning, we took a drive. I had no idea where Mia was taking me. She refused to tell me, only saying, "Trust me." We ended up outside a quiet, modest building on the other side of town. A rehabilitation center. I shot her a look. You brought me to a rehab facility? Stroke recovery, she corrected. People relearning how to walk, talk, regain movement. I narrowed my eyes. Why? She gave me a small smile. Because sometimes seeing people fight for their lives puts things in perspective. I hesitated, but followed her inside. The first thing I noticed was the sound-muted conversations, soft encouragements, the shuffle of movement. And then I saw them. Patients of all ages, pushing through physical therapy, struggling with the simplest tasks. A man trying to hold a spoon steady. A woman gripping a walker, taking small, careful steps while a therapist held her arm. People fighting battles that had nothing to do with proving their worth. They just wanted to live. A therapist noticed us watching and walked over with a warm smile. Can I help you? Mia glanced at me, then back at her. Actually, yeah. My friend here is looking for volunteer opportunities. I snapped my head toward her. Wait, what? The therapist brightened. That's wonderful. We can always use extra hands. Even just spending time with patients, helping with simple tasks, it makes a difference. Mia turned to me, arching an eyebrow. Well, you in? I stared at her. Then at the room full of people actually fighting. Then back at her. I had spent so much of my life focused on my own battles, my own pain, my own scars. Maybe it was time to step outside of that. I exhaled. Yeah, I'm in. At first, I wasn't sure what I was doing. I wasn't a doctor. I wasn't a therapist. But I was there. I spent afternoons reading to patients who struggled with speech, playing card games with people who were relearning fine motor skills. Sometimes, I just sat with them, listening. And slowly, something shifted. It wasn't just them healing. It was me, too. I started sleeping better. The knot in my chest loosened. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't running anymore. One afternoon, I was setting up a chessboard for one of the older patients when I overheard two nurses talking in hushed tones, still refusing therapy. Says, it's pointless. I didn't mean to listen, but something about the conversation pulled me in. His daughter came once, but she never came back, the other nurse said. Maybe that's why. I turned, my stomach dropping. They were talking about him. My father. He was here. I hadn't even known. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the chess piece in my hand. Did I want to see him? Did it even matter? But then I thought about the other patients, the ones who fought every single day to regain even the smallest parts of themselves. And I thought about what the nurse had said. He was refusing therapy. I sighed. Where is he? I found him in his room, staring out the window. He looked thinner than before, weaker. His right hand rested uselessly in his lap. He didn't hear me at first. You're supposed to be doing therapy, I said, crossing my arms. He turned slowly, his face a mixture of surprise and something else, something unreadable. Elena, he murmured. I ignored the way my chest tightened at the sound of my name. Why aren't you doing therapy? I repeated. His expression hardened. What's the point? I let out a humorless laugh. So that's it? You just give up? He scowled. You wouldn't understand. I understand more than you think. I stepped closer. You think I don't know what it's like to start over? To claw my way up from nothing? To fight for something no one thought I could have? His jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. I took a breath. I don't forgive you, I said, my voice steady, and I don't know if I ever will. Something flickered in his eyes, pain maybe, or regret. But, I continued, I'm not going to let you sit here and waste whatever time you have left. He stared at me, silent. Then, slowly, he reached for the walker beside him. It took everything in me not to react, not to let him see how much that small movement shook me. He gripped the handles, his body trembling. And then, with great effort, he pushed himself up. It was slow, shaky, imperfect, but it was something. I let out a slow breath. He wasn't my responsibility. I didn't owe him anything. But in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't here for him. I was here for me. My father took a slow, unsteady step forward. His grip on the walker was tight, his knuckles white, his body trembling under the effort. For a moment, I thought he might collapse. But he didn't. He kept going. I stood there, watching, unsure what to feel. There was no grand realization, no cinematic moment of reconciliation. Just a man who had spent his whole life towering over others, now struggling to stand on his own. He reached the end of the room, turned, and locked eyes with me. There was something there I couldn't quite name. I didn't look away. "Good," I said finally. "Now do it again." He exhaled sharply, almost like a laugh. Almost. Then, gripping the walker tighter, he took another shaky step forward. I didn't visit every day. I wasn't that person. But I came back. Sometimes I sat in the therapy room, watching from the corner as he struggled through basic exercises, lifting his arm, gripping objects, moving his weakened leg an inch at a time. He never asked why I was there, and I never offered an explanation. Maybe we both knew there wasn't one. One afternoon, as I was getting ready to leave, he finally spoke. "You were always stubborn." His voice was still rough, slow from the stroke, but stronger than before. I smirked. "You say that like it's a bad thing." He studied me for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "It's not." It was the closest thing to an apology I was ever going to get. And strangely, it was enough. Months passed. My life moved forward. Research, lectures, conferences. The weight of my past felt lighter. Not gone, but no longer suffocating me. Mia and I kept up our volunteer work at the rehab center. Not for him, never for him, but for me. For the people who wanted to fight. One day, after a long morning in the lab, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something told me to answer. "Elena Carter," I said, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder as I flipped through my notes. A pause. Then, "Elena," I froze. It was my mother. Her voice was as composed as ever, but there was something brittle underneath. Something unfamiliar. I leaned against my desk, my grip tightening around the phone. "What do you want?" She hesitated, just for a second. Then, "Your father told me what you've been doing." I exhaled slowly, and I wanted to thank you. I almost laughed. "For what?" "For being there." Her voice was softer now. "For not abandoning him." I closed my eyes. She still didn't get it. "I wasn't there for him," I said quietly. "I was there for me." Silence stretched between us. Then she said, "Are we ever going to fix this?" I considered that, thought about everything that had happened. And then I said, simply, "No." A shaky breath on the other end. Maybe a quiet sob. Then a soft, "I understand." And just like that, the line went dead. A year later, my father passed away. There was no dramatic ending. No last-minute reconciliation. Just a quiet, inevitable end. I didn't cry. I didn't feel much of anything. But I went to the funeral. Not for him. Not for her. For me. I stood at the back, watching as people who barely knew him spoke about his legacy, his power, his success. Not a single word about the people he hurt along the way. But that was fine, because I knew the truth. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. Mia found me afterward, standing by my car, staring at nothing. She didn't say anything at first, just waited. Then finally she asked, "You okay?" I let out a slow breath. "I think so." And, for the first time in a long time, I meant it. The past didn't own me anymore. I had spent years trying to prove something to him, to her, to myself. But standing there, under the open sky, I realized something. I didn't have to fight anymore. I had already won. Story 2. It's my engagement celebration. I was taken aback when my parents announced that they were giving your sister the house from your childhood. You can't handle the family legacy. However, they claimed that your sister now owned a legacy estate after seeing the mansion I had constructed next door. With a voice that pierced through the champagne-filled excitement of my engagement party, my father made the announcement. "You've never shown the proper respect for family traditions, Emma. Sarah deserves this." At the age of 32, I, Emma Collins, witnessed my parents sell the house where I grew up. The house I'd spent years secretly preparing to restore to my younger sister, who had never spent more than a summer there. The crystal flew in. Even though my hand shook a little, I remained calm, much to my father's obvious dismay. He had expected tears, protests, maybe even a scene. He received a little smile instead. "I understand." I spoke softly, looking him in the eye, and he decided to reveal it at my engagement party. Sarah, my 26-year-old sister, stood beside our parents, practically glowing with triumph. Their ideal daughter she had always been. The person who attended law school in accordance with their meticulous plan, joined our father's firm, and never questioned their choices. However, In spite of their disapproval, I had decided to pursue a career in architecture and urban development and had started my own business from the ground up. With everyone there, we pondered. At least she had the courtesy to appear a little uneasy when my mother drifted off. Jane, my fiancée, gave me a firm handshake, but said nothing. He was aware of the impending event. Everyone is present. I laughed a little and repeated, "Everyone's here to celebrate my engagement, and you decided it was the ideal moment to declare that you were giving away the house." I grew up. The home Mom promised would be mine when I reached 35. Before you left the family company, that is. Before you decided that your small building projects were more significant than legacy, my father retorted. Little construction projects. He referred to it as my multi-million-dollar development firm. I had spent the previous decade creating it from nothing, while secretly accumulating every piece of property surrounding the original estate property. When prices were low, my parents had been too short-sighted to buy. Someone who is familiar with tradition is needed in the house. With a tone full of contempt, Sarah added her voice. Someone who takes good care of it, rather than transforming it into one of your contemporary monsters. As I sipped my champagne slowly, I considered the plans that were concealed in my office. I've been working with the Historical Preservation Committee for the past 3 years, and the permits have already been issued. I responded, "You're correct." Lastly, someone who genuinely recognizes the legacy estate's worth is needed. My calm acceptance caused my mother's eyes to narrow. I used to debate, make my case, and attempt to explain things to them, but I had long since realized that it was useless to try to win their acceptance. Rather, I had invested all of my work into creating something that people couldn't ignore or reject. My father answered, "I'm glad you understand," but it seemed like he had been hoping for more opposition. "Next month, Sarah will take possession. By then, we anticipate that you will have taken out any last bits of personal belongings." I raised my glass and nodded before turning to speak to our visitors. "I appreciate everyone's attendance tonight. Thank you so much for joining James and myself in celebrating. And I have to make my own announcement immediately." My dad's expression hardened. His script did not call for this. James and I have decided not to move into the city flat, as scheduled. I kept paying close attention to my parents' facial expressions. Rather, we'll be residing in the mansion I've been building for the past 3 years. It's directly next door to the legacy estate. The ensuing hush was deafening. As Sarah took in what I had said, her arrogant smirk wavered. When my father saw what I had done, what he had overlooked taking place right in front of him, his cheeks flushed. "That isn't feasible," he sputtered. "I own all of the land surrounding the estate. Every acre I completed for him. You were too preoccupied with questioning my business sense to see that I had purchased everything. Permits have been granted, work is almost finished, and a historical preservation group is very excited about my plans to restore a whole heritage area rather than just one old home." My mom's social mask broke, and she collapsed onto a neighboring chair. "You're not serious." "Oh," I said, bringing up the drawings on my phone. "But I am. Do you want to watch?" In fact, architectural features from the heritage estate were included in the construction of the new home. The Collins Heritage Project is the name we've given it. Several design magazines have previously covered it. As I showed them the pictures of the well-kept trees, the expansive drives, and the contemporary home that complemented rather than overpowered its old neighbor, the visitors crowded around. In order to build something that respected the past while welcoming the future, every little element had been carefully considered. Anger heated Sarah's cheeks as she pushed forward. "It's simply spite. You're attempting to obscure my gift." Keeping my voice low, I turned to face her. "This is business, passion, and vision, Sarah. There are 3 things about me that neither you nor her parents ever understood. You now possess the legacy estate. Well done. I sincerely hope so. It will be the focal point of the heritage walking tours beginning in the spring, so I hope you take good care of it." My father choked out while walking tours. "Of course," I said. "Plans for historical tourism, educational initiatives, and community gatherings are all part of the Collins Heritage Project. While not required, Legacy Estates' involvement would be fantastic. I've already established alliances with other local historic buildings." James put his arm around my waist with a look of pride on his face. "Through all of this," He had been my pillar of support, comprehending why I had waited until the proper time to reveal my plans. I had always been undervalued by my parents, who only saw what they wanted to see, but now they were witnessing the reality. While they were preoccupied questioning me, I had established an empire. My mom said, "You've been preparing this for years." Her eyes began to light up with realization. I did confess it. I chose to create my own legacy, ever since you first implied that I couldn't carry on our family's tradition. My declaration severely interrupted my parents' planned power play, and the engagement celebration ended soon after. Many people silently applauded me as the visitors departed. Some have even shown a desire to contribute to upcoming initiatives. Sarah and my dad left without saying anything more, but I knew that this was not the end of it. Later that evening, I stood on my office balcony and gazed out over the building site where my new home was being built. Just beyond its well-known silhouette, the Legacy Estate stood as a reminder of all I had battled for. "Are you all right?" James inquired. He brought me 2 glasses of wine, and I sipped one while he held me. "I'm more than all right." They saw me for the first time, actually noticed me, as someone who created something significant, rather than as their unsatisfactory daughter. "They ought to have realized that earlier," he remarked. "Perhaps," I said, "but I might not have pushed myself to make all of this if they had." Sometimes the best inspiration comes from being undervalued. My almost finished mansion's lights, which were the result of years of meticulous preparation and labor, glowed in the night. There would be difficulties tomorrow in handling my family's response, completing the building details, and getting ready for the Heritage Project debut. However, I relished the joy of at last sharing my vision tonight. Sarah may now own the Legacy Estate, but I had constructed more than one house. I had left a legacy of my own that would help the community as a whole, not just my family. My parents could give or take away any inheritance, but it was worth more than that. I stood in my office 3 weeks after the engagement party, going over the last few details of the building. My father was an unexpected guest, as my assistant announced. I could see him standing in the reception area through the glass walls, appearing uneasy and out of place with the contemporary furnishings. "Bring him in." I straightened my shoulders and stated that, although I had anticipated this visit, I was somewhat aback by how long it had taken him. He walked stiffly into my office and said, "Emma." His gaze swept over the honors hanging on the walls. In my almost finished house, there is a commanding view of both his priceless inheritance estate and the architectural models on elegant shelves. "Dad?" I pointed to a chair in response. "Why are you interested in my little building project?" He recoiled when his remarks were hurled back at him, but he took a seat. "Yesterday, I received a call from the Historical Preservation Committee. It has to do with planned excursions and educational activities." "Yes," I said, pulling up the presentations on my large screen. "Next month, we will begin the Heritage District program. Numerous local historic homes have already agreed. The inclusion of the Legacy Estate would be fantastic. It's not necessary, though, as I stated during the gathering." "You are attempting to coerce us," he said. I looked directly at him and shook my head. "I'm managing a business, Dad, one that coincidentally supports the preservation of regional heritage. Building a contemporary mansion next door is something you've always said you care about. By drafting an all-encompassing growth strategy that embraces the future while paying respect to the past." I showed him the detailed renderings and made the correction. "Observe how the new building blends in with the old architecture. In order to create a unified neighborhood identity, we have integrated features from each of the original estates in the area." My father leaned forward in spite of himself, his developers taking in the details. I had meticulously prepared. "These resources are genuine to the time period. Yes, I looked for them for 2 years. Just the masonry." I no longer saw a change in his face. "However, you weren't here to talk about the specifics of the building." With a hand stroking his silver hair, he reclined. "Sarah is reconsidering her decision to buy the estate." "Is she?" Even though I felt a glimmer of happiness within, I spoke in a neutral tone. "That's a shame." He acknowledged that the maintenance expenses exceeded her expectations. Additionally, the plans for the Heritage District will greatly raise the value of the properties. "I'm done, but the obligations will follow. Not everyone is suited for historical property management." My dad's work became more demanding. "You anticipated this." I was aware that Sarah had only ever used the estate for social media photos and had never demonstrated any interest in historical preservation. I answered calmly, as if I understood that once the Heritage District was authorized, property taxes would go up. The development plans, which had been available to the public for months, contained all of this information. We were cut off by a knock on my door. James came in with a tablet. I apologize for disturbing you, but the site tour is being conducted by the Historical Society. He hesitated. I can reschedule so I can see my father. I stood and replied, no need. Dad had just walked out. Slowly, my father stood with a puzzled look on his face. I stated that the historical organization is quite enthusiastic about the Heritage District's educational potential. We're talking about collaborations with nearby colleges and institutions. According to your mother, you have also been involved with her women's charity group. Silently, he said, indeed. For students who are interested in urban planning and historical preservation, we are starting a scholarship program. When we talked about it last week, Mom looked really intrigued. He was obviously unaware of this. Your mother and you met. After seeing the project highlighted in the local newspaper, she got in touch. I didn't mention that she'd also apologized in her own manner for the engagement party catastrophe. It was best not to say some things. James cleared his throat. Your consent is also required for the contractor's plans to restore the ballroom. My dad's eyes got big. I mentioned that it was the Cultural Center's ballroom. A state ballroom, the original heritage, is being used as the model. In fact, as a kid, I always adored that room. There was a flash of remorse on my father's face. I said, you used to hide in there during parties, sketching in your notebook, mostly designed concepts. Thoughts on how to maintain its aesthetic appeal while modifying it for contemporary application. Unspoken words weighed heavily on the ensuing stillness. My father finally made his way to the door, but he stopped. Next month is your mother's charity gala. By then, will the new ballroom be completed? James and I looked at one another. Then I answered, perhaps the venue was intended to accommodate just that type of gathering. Before I could reply, he continued, I'll tell her to call you, and walked away. James waited until the elevator doors closed behind my father before speaking. I said, that was interesting indeed, as I saw my father standing outside the window, gazing up at the home that was forming adjacent to his cherished acreage. Have you received Sarah's financial records? James gave me the iPad. Just as you anticipated. She is already considering taking out loans secured by the property. Not surprised, I nodded. Although Sarah had always relied on her parents to support her, the upkeep costs of the estate would soon become too much for her, particularly in light of the new Heritage District rules. Do we need to advance the timeline? James inquired. No, I said, putting the device down. Everything is going according to plan. Sarah will come to her own conclusions about the estate, and when she does, you'll be ready. We'll be ready. I took his hand and corrected him. Without your faith in my vision, none of this would have been possible. He gave my hand a squeeze. Speaking of which, wait till you see the latest renovations to the ballroom. In the archives, we discovered some original molding designs. As James showed me the restoration details, my father's visit came to mind. He came looking for fault, to show that he had made the correct choice in giving Sarah the estate. Rather, he discovered proof of everything he had resisted seeing over the years. My commitment, my skill, and my reverence for the heritage of our family. Whether the legacy estate took part, the heritage area would be successful. However, it was more rewarding than any retaliation to see my father understand that I had produced something greater than he had anticipated, something that would enrich rather than detract from his priceless legacy. Allow Sarah to contend with the demands of the estate. Let my parents consider their options. I had established my own legacy, one that would outlive their doubts and justify every ambition they discarded. In the lobby, members of the Historical Society were congregating. It was time to demonstrate to them the harmonious coexistence of the past and the future. Each strengthens the other. That was the essence of true legacy, after all, enhancing tradition rather than holding on to it in order to produce something even more significant. On the day Sarah formally moved into the legacy estate, the Collins Heritage Project was set to have its grand opening. I could already picture how out of place her ultramodern pieces would look against the meticulously preserved Victorian details as I watched from my office as movers carried her designer furniture up the historic home steps. James joined me at the window and said, "It's ironic that they gave her the estate because they believed you would modernize it too much, and she's doing just what they thought I would do now." I reply, checking my watch. "When will the Heritage Commission be there to conduct the inspection?" 2 hours. Can. Does she know? I grinned. She will shortly. Sarah texted me as if on cue, and my phone buzzed. Why is this member of the historical committee discussing rules and furnishings that are appropriate for the time period? I didn't answer. Rather, I collected my files and went downstairs to join the project team for our last walkthrough. The morning sun shone on the new mansion, its architectural elements perfectly complementing the legacy estate while establishing its own distinct character. Miss Collins, our head preservationist, called out, waving a folder. The Historical Society Board is thrilled with the educational center plans. They're already booking school tours for next month. Excellent, I replied. And the community engagement programs, local universities want to partner for architecture and preservation studies. Your restoration work is already being cited as a model for heritage district development. A commotion from next door interrupted us. Sarah stood on the estate's front steps, her face flushed with anger as the Heritage Commission representative explained something to her. Even from this distance, I could read her body language, the defensive posture, the crossed arms, the impatient foot tapping. "Emma," she shouted, spotting me. "Did you do this? Did you set these people on me?" I excused myself from my team and walked to the property line. The Heritage Commission oversees all historical properties in the district. Sarah as the estate's owner. "You'll need to comply with preservation guidelines. These guidelines are ridiculous," she exploded. "They're saying I can't update the kitchen with modern appliances or replace the old windows with energy-efficient ones. They won't even let me paint." Actually, I corrected gently, "You can do all those things. You just need to follow historical preservation protocols. I have a list of approved contractors who specialize in period-appropriate modernization." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You had this planned. You knew I'd get stuck with all these restrictions. I planned a heritage district that would protect and celebrate our local history," I said firmly. "The legacy estate's involvement is voluntary, of course, though opting out might affect property values." The Heritage Commissioner nodded. Significantly, properties within designated historical districts often receive a 20 to 30% rise in value, providing they follow preservation criteria. Sarah's face paled, but the upkeep charges are tax-deductible under the Heritage Preservation Act, I finished. "I have all the documentation in my office if you'd want to review it." Before she could react, a familiar automobile came into the estate's driveway. Our parents emerged looking anxious. "What's going on?" our father demanded. Sarah called, stating something about not being permitted to remodel, just studying heritage district guidelines. Calmly, I explained. Conventional practice for historic properties. The commissioner sees the chance to dive into a full discussion of preservation rules, historic tax benefits, and maintenance criteria. As the financial ramifications became evident, I saw my father's face change from irritation to worry. Additionally, as we are located within the history district, all of these rules are applicable, he inquired. With great enthusiasm, the commissioner affirmed that the legacy estate is a cornerstone property. Because of its historical value, it must meet the strictest preservation guidelines. However, the restoration project your daughter is working on next door is a great example of contemporary integration. With a look of understanding in his eyes, my father turned to face me. "All of these specifications have already been met in the new residence." "Of course," I said. "We spent 3 years integrating contemporary amenities while making sure every detail complied with or surpassed preservation regulations. In the long term, it's actually more economical." Sarah made a wise and economical choice. "Do you realize how much these preservation contractors charge?" "I do," I answered. "I am also familiar with the tax breaks and grant programs that help defray those expenses. The management plan for the Heritage District includes all of this." After silently watching, our mother eventually said anything. "The plan you tried to tell us about 2 years ago, the one we dismissed as unrealistic." The ensuing quiet was thick with familiarity. They were at last appreciating the breadth of my creation. The neighborhood's future would be shaped by a comprehensive heritage preservation system, not just one restored mansion. Perhaps, our father said slowly, we should discuss this further as a family. I looked at my watch. In an hour, the project will open, and then I have meetings with the Preservation Board and a historical society. But tomorrow I'm free. Our mother mimicked the opening. Indeed, naturally. The one that was highlighted in the Architectural Digest this month. Asterisk. James confirmed that he would be joining us. National attention has been drawn to the Heritage District concept. M is being recognized by the State Preservation Society next month. Sarah sagged against the elaborate railing of the mansion. This is impossible, she said. I am unable to handle the requirements and uphold all of these criteria. Nobody expects you to master preservation in a day. I spoke in a softer voice. These items are handled by specialists. The same people you collaborate with, our dad inquired. I gave a nod. In their field, they are the best. Even so, they're waiting. With all of the History District homes in need of maintenance, the list is becoming fairly lengthy. The commissioner excused himself, leaving us in another loaded silence. The difference between the properties was startling. The legacy estate loomed behind Sarah like a lovely but taxing responsibility, while my meticulously restored mansion was bustling with intentional activity. According to our mother, she wasn't ready to manage the charity event. Suddenly, it's in 3 weeks. It will take a lot of effort to get the estate's ballroom up to code for public gatherings. The ballroom of the cultural center will be prepared. I provided cutting-edge facilities that complied with all current laws and preservation guidelines. Sarah pushed the railing aside. Take it, she urged in a strained voice. The property. It's obvious you know how to handle it. I'll look for another place to call home. Our father began Sarah, but she interrupted him. Now, Dad, we all realized this was a mistake and was the one who genuinely cared about maintaining the estate's heritage. All I wanted was, in an attempt to prove something, she trailed off. I made a gentle suggestion. Believe me, I can relate to the emotion. As our parents looked at each other, decades of presumptions and errors hung between us. The sound of approaching autos caught our attention. The first reporter to show up for the project launch. Let's have a conversation, our dad said. Really? Talk about everything. I gave a nod. Tomorrow morning, my office Bring Your Attorneys will meet to discuss transferring the estate correctly this time. I watched the media set up their cameras, using my mansion's grounds as the backdrop, while they departed to attend to Sarah's upcoming move. Family conflict wasn't the main focus of the Heritage District narrative. It was about maintaining heritage while developing for the future. Are you ready? James squeezed my hand and asked. I took one final look at the inheritance estate. Its ballroom reminds me of all the dreams I've drawn there. More than prepared. It's time to show everyone what legacy actually means. 1 month after Sarah abandoned the legacy estate, I stood in its rebuilt ballroom watching my mother's charity banquet spread the space globe with meticulously maintained Victorian chandeliers, their light bouncing off the beautifully restored wooden floors. My recently finished home was visible through the large windows. The two properties now function together as the focal points of the flourishing history area. As she joined me by the window, my mother remarked, "It's just like I imagined, but I think you had the idea long before any of us did. As a child, I used to sit in here and draw pictures of how the estate could be preserved while evolving into something more," I said. I simply never imagined that it would take losing it to accomplish that. She lightly stroked my arm. "Emma, we were mistaken. I couldn't see because your father and I were too preoccupied with upholding tradition. Our goal is not to destroy it, but to improve it." As he led a group of interested board members on a tour throughout the room, my father proudly explained the historical value of numerous architectural aspects that I had meticulously researched and repaired. Next week marks the opening of the Heritage Education Center. We have a full schedule of academic events and school excursions for the upcoming 6 months, I continued. Sarah, too. She's doing well in her new condo downtown. Actually, it appears relieved to be off the hook. Last week, we had coffee, discussed her, maybe joining the Heritage District's community outreach program. My mom's eyebrows went up. Really? She's very good at social media. I gave a shrug. The Historical Society might need help publicizing its activities to younger people. James appeared with champagne, handing us each a glass. The Preservation Board chairman wants to examine spreading the History District idea to additional communities. Of course he does, my father stated, joining our group. Since the project's inception, the area's property prices have risen by 30%. Every developer in the city is trying to replicate your model, Emma. He offered assistance, but it has nothing to do with the money I initiated. Now I am aware of that. It's about creating something meaningful, something that honors the past while building toward the future. He smiled slightly. Something I should have comprehended when you first attempted to explain it to me years ago. A quartet of strings started playing from the musician's alcove that had been restored. During the remodeling, I also found another architectural feature. Couples came onto the dance floor, their modern knight's clothes making an interesting contrast against the Victorian atmosphere. I've been talking to your mother about what to do with the Collins family properties, my father said cautiously. Not just the estate, but all of them. I waited, feeling there was more. We want you to supervise everything, he added. Future projects, the heritage area, the estate, all of it. Not because you're our daughter, but because you've demonstrated you understand how to protect and develop our heritage better than anybody, even you. I couldn't help asking. He genuinely laughed. In particular, myself. Years ago, I would have updated this location, destroyed half its historical value without realizing it. James gave me a firm squeeze on the hand while I thought about their offer. I have health issues. Finally, I said. You do, of course. Mom grinned. You have a plan all the time. Preservation covenants will keep the estate and my mansion permanently within the Heritage District. The educational activities go on, and we lay the groundwork for other historic sites to carry out comparable preservation projects. The paperwork has already been drafted. My dad took an envelope out of his jacket and confessed, "Your attorney was helpful." I blinked, startled. "Did you visit Mr. Harrison?" With a dry tone, my mother stated, "We've learned to consult experts, particularly those who have outsmarted us." Looking around the ballroom, I saw my childhood dreams made reality. The estate functioned as more than simply a prestige symbol or a conserved artifact. As it developed into its next chapter, it served as a living example of history, passing on lessons to new generations. James nodded toward the doors and added, "There's one more thing." They opened to see Sarah, looking apprehensive but determined. She had a well-known notebook in a leather binding. My old childhood notebook full of sketches and ideas for the estate. Discovered this one moving out, she said, holding it out to me. Thought you may want it back, though. Those dreams have already come true because of you. Reminiscent of hours spent hiding in corners and drawing fantasies that everyone had rejected. I snatched the notepad. Maybe not all of them yet, I said. There is still space for expansion in the Heritage District. Could need someone that knows social media marketing. A smile pulled at her lips. My proposal was accepted this morning by the Historical Society Board. Apparently my sister's opinion carries a lot of weight around here. Imagine that, our father murmured. The classic waltz that used to play at every family gathering in this ballroom has been replaced with a new song. James extended his hand. Can I have this dance? I glimpsed flashes of my family looking on proudly as we crossed the floor. I changed the estate into something better than they had envisioned, not because I had regained control of it. No longer was the legacy estate only a reminder of the past. It was a bridge to the future, proof that preservation and progress could coexist together. Happy? James inquired quietly. I looked around at the restored ballroom, through the windows at my mansion next door, and beyond, to the thriving Heritage District that had grown from my childhood dreams. More than happy, I replied. I'm home. The Heritage Estate pulsated with fresh life that was not only maintained, but also reborn as the music grew and the chandelier glistened. Sometimes I realized losing something is the only way to convert it into everything it was meant to be. Story 3, you dare not. I won't be denied this chance by you, I murmured, standing at the doorway of Thomas Miller's office, my voice rising. The department head looked up from his desk with a smug grin that made my stomach flip. After a decade of dedicated service to Peterson Engineering, this was how it would end. I'm 52-year-old Kelly Thompson, and I've worked for one of the top engineering firms in San Francisco for the past 10 years, through 2 recessions, 3 corporate reorganizations, and many late hours spent honing designs. I had shown myself to be indispensable, or so I believed. Sit down, Kelly. Thomas indicated the chair on the other side of his desk, his voice carrying the prepared compassion that HR must be covered in management education. For your position, we are bringing in a younger candidate. It's time to move on after 10 years. The words hovered in the air between us. Someone younger, not someone more competent or experienced, only younger. I inhaled deeply despite the usual fire of fury swelling in my chest. An emotional outburst was not necessary at this moment. Calmly, the first nodded. Thank you, Thomas, for the notice. He obviously wasn't expecting my mute response. Momentarily off script, Thomas blinked. All right, good. I'm happy you get it. Over the course of the following month, the transition will occur. Olivia, you'll have to train your replacement. Next week, she will graduate from Berkeley. I smiled weakly. Naturally. What? No one in the department knew that the upcoming board meeting would be unique, but Thomas was unaware of this. Very, very special. Will a formal announcement be made? I inquired. I spoke steadily. At Monday's department meeting, we will make the announcement. Thomas dismissed me with a reply, already returning his focus to his computer screen. HR will be in touch about your severance package. I straightened my blazer and got to my feet. I understand. Additionally, next Thursday at 2 p.m. is still the date of the quarterly board meeting. Thomas looked up, confusion flickering across his face. Absolutely. But you don't have to worry about that anymore. I'm just checking my calendar again, I said lightly. Will CEO Davis be in attendance? Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly. Why do you ask? Just curious, I replied with a shrug. Well, I won't take up any more of your time. As I walked out of his office, I felt strangely calm. 10 years at Peterson Engineering had taught me patience, resilience, and the importance of knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. The next board meeting would reveal everything, and Thomas Miller's smug satisfaction would evaporate faster than morning fog on the bay. Some secrets were worth keeping even when you were being shown the door. As I walked back to my desk, I couldn't help but smile at the irony of it all. 10 years of dedication reduced to a casual dismissal in a 15-minute meeting. Yet here I was, holding on to information that would completely flip the script. Is everything all right? Asked Javier, my coworker from the opposite cubicle. His eyes held genuine concern. He'd watched too many individuals follow that exact way from Thomas's office, faces drawn with shock and disappointment. Never better, I answered, voice low enough to avoid attracting notice. Just the usual Friday drama. I hadn't informed anyone about the secret meeting with CEO Catherine Davis 3 weeks earlier. It had been unexpected. A call immediately to my personal phone on a Sunday afternoon, while I was carrying to my rooftop garden. Kaylee, we need to talk about your future at Peterson. Catherine had stated, her typically stiff tone relaxed and straightforward. Not at the office. Can you meet me at Bayview Cafe tomorrow at 7 a.m.? The recollection of that morning was still fresh. Due to her early arrival, Catherine was able to reserve a secluded corner table with a breathtaking view of the Golden Gate Bridge, which was obscured by the morning mist. After exchanging pleasantries, she added, I'll get right to the point. Our leadership strategy is being restructured by the board. Your work on the Westlake project has been observed by us. Your innovative solutions saved us millions and impressed our biggest clients. Instead of appreciation, I had been braced for negative news. Thank you. However, you should be on the executive board. Catherine had stayed as our new chief operations officer. You have a unique understanding of our business's human and technological aspects. The offer had been astonishing and unanticipated. A position on the board that would supervise Thomas's department, as well as all other operational facets of Peterson Engineering. Why me? I had inquired. I'm still taking in the enormity of the chance. Because you see what others, Miss Catherine had answered simply. Additionally, it's time for someone who understands what it's like to be in the trenches to join us at the table. Catherine had suggested the concealment. Although the board vote is really a formality, I must carefully handle the politics. If they were aware in advance, some members could attempt to meddle, especially those with ties to Thomas. Therefore, Catherine and the company's legal counsel would be the only people present when I signed the contract. On my calendar, I had been attending early morning strategy sessions for 3 weeks, under the guise of vendor meetings. While Thomas planned my dismissal, I had spent the evenings reviewing classified information and assisting with the creation of a new operational framework. Back at my desk, I checked my phone. Something Catherine sent Filed contracts. Announcement prepared. Thursday is still scheduled. I texted back a single thumbs up emoji for the rest of the afternoon. I put a lot of effort into writing transition notes for my alleged replacement. Thomas walked past twice, each time wearing a satisfied expression. Let him enjoy this moment of imagined success. 6 days remained till the actual unveiling. The weekend dragged on indefinitely as I prepared for what would probably be the most crucial week of my career. Wearing the same business clothes I had worn for years, I got to the workplace early on Monday morning. Nothing that would indicate that my status was about to change. The department meeting was set at 10 a.m. in the main meeting room. I took my usual seat near the middle of the table. Not really noticeable, not too obscure. The room was filled with the typical Monday morning energy exchanges between engineers and project managers who were discussing weekend plans, project deadlines, and industry rumors. A young woman I had never seen before came in after Thomas. Her age could not have exceeded 23, with wide eyes that scanned the room with unabashed eagerness and a hesitant smile. Greetings to everybody, Thomas announced, slapping his hands together. I have a crucial announcement to make before we start discussing project updates. The room instantly became silent. A few of my coworkers looked at me, anticipating what was about to happen. I'd like to welcome Olivia Parker, a senior design engineer who will be joining our team. Carly, who is leaving us to pursue other opportunities, will be working closely with her over the course of the next month. The business term for being driven out was there. I maintained a neutral appearance, while compassionate and inquisitive gazes were directed at me. We've had Kaylee for 10 years. Thomas went on to say that we value her contributions and that he was giving me a great honor by recognizing my service. As Olivia assumes this significant responsibility, kindly make her feel at home. Olivia waved a little. I can't wait to get started on the team. Regarding Peterson Engineering, I've heard nothing but positive things. As the meeting progressed through project updates and quarterly targets, I noticed Thomas watching me carefully, perhaps expecting an outburst or a sign of distress. Instead, I participated regularly, sharing thoughts on my current projects and volunteered to help with a hard customer issue. After the meeting, Olivia approached me tentatively. Miss Thompson, Thomas said you'd be showing me the ropes this week. Of course, I said, motioning for her to come to my office. And please call me Kaylee. I was a little sorry for Olivia as we strolled. Unaware of the complex dynamic she had entered, Jane was only a pawn in Thomas's game. When we arrived to my desk, I told them that engineering at Peterson is as much about politics as it is about technical proficiency. Olivia seems taken aback by my candor. My expectation was that it would be more merit-based. I grinned. It ought to be. Maybe someday it will be again. The following 3 days flew by, filled with project handoffs, knowledge transfer workshops, and meticulous process documentation. Through it all, I kept my professional approach, giving Olivia every edge I could without betraying my genuine situation. Catherine scheduled a company-wide meeting for Friday morning, the day following the board meeting, on Wednesday afternoon. New leadership announcements and major organizational developments were addressed in the communication. Thomas frowned as he read the note, obviously unaware of Catherine's plans. Do you know what this is about? He questioned me casually as he passed my desk. No idea. I lied with ease. Perhaps they finally found someone to replace that VP post that's been empty. He gave a nod. I went away, satisfied with my ignorance. Thursday was approaching swiftly, and with it, the moment of truth. I had a peculiar sensation of calmness come over me on Thursday morning. I had carefully planned my outfit for this day, selecting a fitted charcoal suit that I had bought specifically for the event and a delicate jade silk blouse that accentuated my green eyes. It was an executive look, yet no one would dispute it as being particularly out of character for me. My farewell party was in full swing when I got to work. A depressing array of tepid coffee and cupcakes from the grocery in the break room. A card with generic well wishes and memories of projects we'd worked on together was signed by my coworkers. With Grace performing my role in this corporate drama, I took their sympathies. We'll miss you around here, murmured Javier, giving me an uncomfortable side hug. It won't be the same without your issue-solving wizardry. I meant it when I said, thank you. Many of these individuals were actual coworkers who were not involved in Thomas's schemes. I will also miss this team. Thomas kept a close eye on his watch while standing at the edge of the crowd. As the head of the department, He had to prepare his quarterly presentation once more for the board meeting, which was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. I knew precisely what was in it. Years ago, I had contributed to the reporting framework's design. "When you're done here, Carly, may we meet in my office?" Without waiting for a response, he inquired and turned to go. After 15 minutes, I sat across from him and observed him moving papers about on his desk. Without looking up, he remarked, "I wanted to thank you for handling this transition so professionally. It's refreshing considering your time with the organization." The little emphasis on tenure made it obvious what he truly meant. It felt like the right answer for someone my age. I gave a fair response. At last, Thomas looked directly into my eyes. "Your severance payout is substantial. 2-month salary plus your unused vacation time. The documentation will be available for your signing tomorrow." "Thank you for that." He leaned back in his chair, curiosity finally getting the better of him. I had to inquire. "You've handled all of this with astonishing composure. Did you anticipate it?" I gave in to a little mysterious smile. "Let's just say that during my time here, I've learned to be ready for anything, Thomas." A little hardness crept into his face. "Well, business needs change. New viewpoints are required. I have no doubt that you fully comprehend." I concurred. "Any organization will inevitably undergo change. Sometimes it comes from unexpected directions." My cryptic statement caused his eyes to widen, but before he could respond more, a reminder sounded on his phone. "I need to prepare for the board meeting." "Of course," I said, getting up to go. "I hope your presentation goes well. The board has always impressed me with its attention to detail." I could feel his gaze on my back as I left, a new uneasiness in his eyes. Just as I had planned, my cool acceptance had sowed a seed of doubt. I was back at my work when Catherine texted me. A 130 conference room. Enter via the executive door. I devoted the next 2 hours to preparing thorough instructions for Olivia, backing up personal information, and carefully arranging my workstation. To the observer, I was just being thorough. I grabbed my leather portfolio and went to the bathroom before leaving at 115, a perfectly normal afternoon activity that wouldn't raise suspicions. Once out of the engineering department's line of sight, I changed route, riding the elevator to the top floor where senior executives kept their offices. In my 10 years with the company, I had never had to use the executive suite's private entrance to the boardroom, until today. In the corridor, Catherine was waiting for me. A look of eagerness lightened her ordinarily solemn countenance. "Ready to make history?" she asked quietly. I inhaled deeply, sensing the gravity of the situation. "I'm as prepared as I will ever be." "Perfect," she replied, checking her watch. "The other board members are already seated. At precisely 2:00 p.m., Thomas will arrive via the main door. Let's make sure we're in place before then." Together, we moved toward the executive door to conference room A, where everything was about to change. Peterson Engineering's boardroom radiated strength and tradition. 12 high-backed leather chairs surrounded an immense mahogany table that had witnessed decades of critical decisions. The expansive view of the San Francisco cityscape provided by the floor-to-ceiling windows served as a continual reminder of the heights to which the business had ascended. By 1:45 p.m., 10 board members had already taken their seats and were chit-chatting before the meeting. On her right, Catherine gave a subtle nudge toward an empty chair, my assigned seat. As I took my place, I experienced a brief wave of anxiety, but it soon passed when I saw several board members smile in recognition. The board's 70-year-old chairman, William Harrison, held out his hand. "It's great to have you here with us, Miss Thompson, at last. You have been praised by Catherine for your operational insights." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I appreciate the chance." My voice was firm as I answered. Despite the significance of the moment, I spent the next 10 minutes getting to know each board member. The majority were familiar with me from past project presentations or by reputation, but this exchange was unique. I was no longer a subordinate, but a peer, reporting up the chain. The main entrance opened at exactly 2 p.m. Entering with his presenting materials, Thomas exuded confidence. He went around the table, putting copies of his report at each seat and introducing himself to a few board members by name. Then he turned to face me. There was a little but noticeable shift in his face. Bewilderment gave way to incredulity, which quickly gave way to alarm. "What are you doing here, Kaylee?" he inquired, his voice pitched somewhat higher than normal. Before I could reply, Catherine took center stage and commanded the attention of the room. Let's begin. She made the announcement and motioned for everyone to sit down. I have a crucial announcement to make before we discuss department reports. Thomas stood there, looking from Catherine to me, obviously attempting to make sense of what was going on. Thomas, please sit down, Catherine instructed, holding off on speaking until he obeyed. As everyone is aware, Peterson Engineering has been strategically reorganizing in order to better prepare for the challenges that lie ahead. Following a thorough assessment, the executive committee and I have determined that all departments require significant operational improvements. Thomas stopped staring at me and fidgeted with his pen. Catherine went on to take the lead in this endeavor. We required someone with deep institutional knowledge, proven technical expertise, and the ability to bridge divisions within our organization. I am pleased to announce that Kaylee Thompson has accepted the position of Chief Operations Officer, effective immediately. The room was filled with applause. As CEO, I received nods from a number of board members. Kaylee will be in charge of the company's engineering, manufacturing, supply chain, and quality control operations, Catherine explained, her voice strong and forceful. All department heads will report directly to her, making the decision-making process more efficient. Thomas's face had drained of color. I wasn't aware of this reorganization, he stammered. The decision was finalized 3 weeks ago. Catherine replied evenly on a need-to-know basis. William Harrison leaned forward. Miss Thompson's appointment was unanimously approved by the executive committee. Her first responsibility will be doing a full evaluation of all departments, finding inefficiencies and potential for development. I eventually spoke, keeping my voice professional and measured. To maximize our operations, I'm excited to collaborate with the directors of every department. Though sometimes the right position is needed to maximize that value, everyone contributes something valuable to this organization. Thomas's gaze locked with me, deciphering the veiled meaning. I had now taken over his department. Catherine skillfully continued the meeting by saying that I would now review his decision to replace me. Let's proceed with the quarterly reports. I think you're first, Thomas. Thomas struggled with his presentation materials while standing on wobbly legs. Days after dismissing me, the self-assured department head was gone, replaced by a man who was now doubting every choice that had brought us to this point. Before you begin, I intervened softly. I want to talk about the personnel adjustments you suggested earlier this week. Maybe we ought to go back and review some of those choices. The ensuing silence was profound. With a bead of perspiration visible on his temple, Thomas cleared his throat. Maybe we ought to talk about departmental staffing. After the meeting, he suggested. He spoke in a strained tone. Actually, I answered, keeping a neutral tone, since it affects the quarterly estimates you're about to provide. We should address it now. I looked at the board. Thomas has suggested that our senior design engineer be replaced. My current role involves a recent graduate with no prior industry experience. Several board members exchanged concerned glances. The Westlake project is entering its most critical phase, I continued. Changing key personnel now creates unnecessary risk to both timeline and budget. William Harrison frowned. Is this accurate, Thomas? The Westlake deal comprises 20% of our annual income. Thomas's presentation folder shook slightly in his hands. I believed fresh perspectives would benefit the team. Even to his own ears, his words sounded hollow. But obviously, with the new organizational structure, we can reassess. Yes, I did agree. Actually, I've already discussed taking over the position with Diana Ford. Her 15 years of experience and familiarity with the Westlake specifications make her the logical choice. Catherine gave a nod of approval. Diana is a superb engineer. I support this decision. The look of defeat on Thomas's face was unmistakable, but he managed to proceed with his quarterly report. His usually confident delivery was replaced by hesitation and frequent references to notes. When he finished, the questions from board members were pointed and occasionally critical, quite unlike the easy greeting he usually received. More departmental updates as the discussion went on. I kept thorough notes and asked intelligent questions that exhibited my full awareness of the company's operations. The attitude in the room had clearly changed. By the time we got to new business items, board members increasingly directed their questions to me, rather than Catherine or the department heads near the meeting's conclusion. Catherine introduced another agenda item as part of our restructuring. We'll be reviewing each department's age, demographics, and succession planning strategies. Recent evidence reveals our most inventive ideas have come from cross-generational collaboration. She exhibited a slide demonstrating productivity indicators across different age groups. As you can see, teams with age diversity consistently outperform homogeneous groups. Carly will be leading an initiative to ensure we maintain healthy age distribution throughout the organization. Thomas looked at me from the other side of the table. Experience and fresh perspectives both have value when properly integrated. I said I look forward to working with all department heads to optimize their team compositions. The meeting adjourned at 4:30 p.m. As board members gathered their materials and engaged in post-meeting conversations, Thomas approached me warily. He said sternly, "Congratulations on your promotion. Had I known, you'd have made different decisions." For him, I completed. "I fully comprehend." He nodded uncomfortably about Olivia. "She's talented, but inexperienced," I said. "I think she'd benefit from our junior engineer development program, rather than being thrown into a senior role prematurely. Don't you agree?" Thomas knew he had no choice. "Naturally. I'll inform her of the change." "No need," I said. "As CEO, I should welcome all new employees personally. I'll meet with her tomorrow to discuss her actual role and set appropriate expectations." Catherine joined us, effectively ending the conversation. "Kaylee, the executive team is gathering for dinner at Bayside Restaurant at 7. We'd love for you to join us." "I'd be delighted," I said, collecting my notes as Thomas walked away. Catherine watched him with a calculating expression. "He'll either adapt or find himself increasingly marginalized," she observed quietly. "Everyone eventually faces the consequences of their decisions," I answered, "some sooner than others." As I walked out of the boardroom through the executive entrance, the sun was sinking over San Francisco Bay, not as a visitor this time, but as someone who belonged there. Tomorrow, the company-wide announcement would make my new position official, but today's reversal of fortune was pleasure. Enough. The 10 years I'd invested in Peterson Engineering had finally paid off, not in the manner Thomas had hoped. When he'd called me into his office with that satisfied grin. Just days ago, Friday morning's company-wide meeting brought a distinct energy to the auditorium. Employees from every department gathered, muttering suspicions regarding the organizational changes described in Catherine's email. I stood backstage with Catherine and the executive team, dressed in a blue suit that signified my new power while yet felt authentic to myself. "Feeling anxious?" Catherine asked, straightening her blazer. "Surprisingly, no," I replied. "It feels right." Catherine took the stage to thunderous applause at precisely 9 in the morning. I watched from the wings as she outlined Peterson Engineering's vision for the future, emphasizing innovation, collaboration, and strategic growth. "To take us through this next stage," Catherine declared, "I'm thrilled to welcome our new Chief Operations Officer, Kelly Thompson." The response was swift and overwhelming as soon as I stepped onto the stage. Engineers who had worked alongside me for years stood in applause. Project managers who had seen my solutions save impossible deadlines cheered. Even the administrative staff, with whom I'd always maintained respectful relationships, showed their approval. Thomas sat in the third row, clapping mechanically, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," I began, waiting for the applause to subside. "For 10 years, I've had the privilege of solving problems at Peterson Engineering. Today, I'm honored to help shape our collective future." I outlined my vision for operational excellence, emphasizing collaboration across generations and departments. "Experience and fresh perspectives both have tremendous value," I said, making brief eye contact with Thomas. "Our strength lies in harnessing both." Following the presentation, staff members come up to congratulate each other. Olivia, looking slightly confused, waited until most had dispersed. "Miss Thompson, I mean Kelly," she began tentatively. "I'm a little unclear about my position now." I gave a comforting grin. "Let's meet at my office in 1 hour. I think you have great potential, just not in the role Thomas originally proposed." As the crowd thinned, I spotted Javier giving me a knowing grin and a thumbs up from across the room. Perhaps he'd suspected something all along. The transition into my role as CEO happened more smoothly than anyone might have expected. By Monday a.m., I had moved into the executive suite on the top floor, a big corner office with windows facing the Bay Bridge. The contrast to my former cubicle was striking, but I made sure to bring along the small jade plant that had survived 10 years of engineering crises with me. Some continuity was important. My first official week was packed with meetings. getting to know each department head personally, reviewing ongoing projects, and assessing operational bottlenecks. I made a point of being visible throughout the building, visiting departments, and speaking directly with employees at all levels. This wasn't just good leadership. It was a statement that the walls between executives and personnel were being eliminated. Thomas had been notably subdued. Our first one-on-one meeting had been brief and focused strictly on his department's metrics. He avoided direct eye contact and kept his remarks brief and professional. I neither gloated nor referenced our previous dynamics, treating him with the same respectful professionalism. I showed all department heads. On Friday afternoon, Catherine stopped by my office with 2 cups of coffee. One weekend then. "What is the sensation?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk, challenging in the best possible ways. I answered truthfully, "There's so much opportunity for improvement." She nodded, looking pleased. "Your strategy has so far impressed the board. William Harrison made special mention of your ability to pose insightful queries. I've had years to think about what I'd do differently if given the chance." I acknowledged. Catherine gave a knowing smile. "You were the appropriate decision for precisely that reason. Oh, and I thought you'd want to know. Thomas has requested a transfer to our Seattle office." "Running away?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "He claims it's for family reasons, but we both know better," Catherine said. I considered this news thoughtfully. "Let's approve it. Sometimes a fresh start benefits everyone." Catherine raised her coffee cup in a small toast, spoken like a true executive.